Marcus slid the thin, spiral-bound file across the polished surface of the conference table. He announced to everyone that, as they could see, my metrics were unacceptable. This was the meeting he had called. My execution. He was the new vice president of operations, a title he wore like a rented tuxedo, and he had convened this unscheduled performance review in conference room B. He had also invited Richard and Anne, 2 other senior executives, to bear witness. They were the gray, silent ones, the ones who always sided with perceived power. They stared at their empty notepads, refusing to meet my gaze. Marcus leaned back in his chair, radiating a smugness that was almost suffocating. He genuinely believed he had me. He thought this file, this clumsy fabrication of numbers he had rushed over the last 2 weeks, was a masterpiece of corporate strategy. He believed I was just a mid-level manager, isolated, unconnected, and weak. He had seen me as an obstacle to his plan from the day he arrived, and now he was removing me. He expected me to panic. He was waiting for the tears, the desperate apologies, the sputtering, incoherent defense. I did not look at the file. I did not need to. I looked directly at him. My expression was flat, my hands perfectly still on the table in front of me. I let the silence stretch. This was not weakness. This was control. I internally analyzed his sloppy work. I already knew what was in that file. I had seen the data he was pulling from the shared drive. The metrics were manipulated, but with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He had taken credit for projects I had fixed and assigned my team's successes to his own pet projects. It was lazy. His arrogance, his narcissistic rage when I had quietly corrected him in a budget meeting last month, had made him rush. He was stupid. He was a bully who believed his title was his intellect. He was still talking, listing my failures. He droned on about my lack of initiative and my failure to align with new directives. It was just noise. His voice triggered a memory. It was my first team meeting with him, 3 months ago. I had proposed a simple cost-saving measure, a way to optimize a logistics route that would save the company $50,000 a quarter. He had cut me off mid-sentence. He had waved his hand dismissively in front of the entire team. He said my opinion was irrelevant, that I should stick to my spreadsheets. Now, he was sitting in the same room, still talking, still operating under the assumption that my opinion and my power were irrelevant. He was a fool. He had no idea what I had done 5 years ago. He had no idea who I had saved. He had no idea what I was doing right now. While Marcus continued his monologue about my unacceptable performance, I slid my right hand off the table. Beneath the polished wood, hidden from his view, I held my phone. I unlocked it. I opened my messages. I selected the contact. David. I typed a simple message, telling David I needed his help with Marcus. Now, in conference room B, I hit send. I slid the phone back into my pocket. My hand returned to the table, perfectly still, palms down. Marcus had finally stopped talking. The air was thick with his expectation. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for me to fight back against the fake numbers in his stupid little file. He was waiting for me to dig my own grave by becoming emotional. I gave him nothing. I just stared, letting the silence become an aggressive, deliberate force. I let him stew in his own cheap victory, waiting for the real power to arrive. Marcus was staring at me, his face starting to flush with annoyance. My silence was not the reaction he had anticipated, and it was angering him. He was a man who needed noise, who needed screams or submission to feel powerful. I was giving him neither. He opened his mouth, probably to escalate his attack, perhaps to slam his hand on the table. He never got the chance. The conference room door opened. It did not open slowly. It was pushed open with a speed and purpose that made Richard and Anne flinch. David stood in the doorway. He was the CEO's right hand, the chief strategy officer, a man who operated in the stratosphere of the company, Aplas Marcus, with his gaudy new title, had never actually reached. David was the true power in the building. He was the man whose career I had saved 5 years ago. Marcus turned. His face did not just go pale, it went slack. It was the face of a man who had just seen a ghost. The face of a man who had meticulously planned a battle, only to realize he had invaded the wrong country. He had miscalculated. He had miscalculated so badly that his brain had visibly shut down. He had seen me as a pawn, never considering, not for 1 second, that I might have a king on my side of the board. David's eyes scanned the room. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at Richard or Anne. He looked directly at me. I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not nod in greeting. I simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible dip of my chin. It was not a plea for help. It was an acknowledgement. A vet collected. David understood. He stepped fully into the room. Marcus finally found his voice, but it was a thin, reedy version of the boom he had used minutes before. He stammered that they were in the middle of a confidential performance review. David ignored him, as if Marcus were just a piece of furniture. He walked to the table and picked up the spiral-bound file. My unacceptable metrics. He held it for a second, feeling its weight. I watched Marcus watch the file. His last hope. His fabricated proof. David told him. His voice quiet, almost casual, which made it terrifying, that he had just reviewed his candidate proposal for my replacement. The one he had sent to HR 30 minutes ago. This was the true genius of David. He did not bother to defend me. He did not argue about the metrics in the file. That would have given the file, and Marcus, legitimacy. Instead, he attacked Marcus's own arrogance. Marcus had been so certain of his victory, so convinced that I would be gone by noon, that he had already sent the email to hire his crony before he had even spoken to me. It was the fatal, arrogant overreach. David looked at the file in his hand. He said that this was garbage. He did not place it down. He turned and dropped the file, with its neat little spiral binding, directly into the trash can by the wall. Marcus made a small noise, a sort of choked gasp. David turned back to him. He told Marcus that he was in violation of standard hiring protocols, which he knew he had been trained on. He told him he was in violation of conflict of interest policies, given that his candidate was his former subordinate from his last company. And frankly, David added, he was in violation of basic intelligence. He let that last one hang in the air. David then looked at Richard and Anne, who were both trying to melt into their chairs. He told them that Marcus was being relieved of his duties, effective immediately. Security would escort him out. It was done. The strategic battle was over. It had taken less than 30 seconds. Marcus just stared, his mouth open. The color had not returned to his face. He had been executed, and he was the last one to understand it. Richard and Anne were already closing their notepads, standing up, avoiding looking at the man they had been placating moments earlier. I remained seated. I did not move. I just watched. I watched the man who had called my opinion irrelevant, the man who had tried to destroy my career to install his friend, get processed like a bad piece of inventory. I remained seated in conference room B. Richard and Anne had scurried out of the room the moment David finished speaking, muttering something about another meeting. They were cowards. Rats leaving a ship that was not even sinking. Just getting a new captain. Now, it was just David and me. The silence in the room was absolute, a stark contrast to the frantic energy that had just been expelled. David, the man who held the real power, the man who had just ended a VP's career in 30 seconds, finally sat down. He looked tired, but he looked at me with a profound, unspoken respect. He apologized. On behalf of the company, he said it never should have happened. He had hired him, and that was on him. He said he should have listened to the quiet ones, not the loud ones. I just nodded. I did not say it was okay. It was not okay. But it was handled. I did not say thank you, because this was not a favor. This was a debt, paid in full. We both understood the transaction. I asked, my voice even, what happened now? He replied that now, we clean up his mess. HR would handle the termination. The legal team was already involved. He gestured to the glass wall of the conference room, which overlooked the main atrium and the security desks in the lobby 3 floors below. He said that he was handled. I followed his gaze. Down in the lobby, I could see him. Marcus. He was standing next to the main security console. But he was not a visitor, and he was not an employee. A uniformed security guard. Frank was standing a polite but firm 5 feet away from him. Frank was holding Marcus's corporate access badge in his hand. Marcus's corporate life was over. He was no longer the new vice president. He was just a man in an expensive suit, yelling into his personal cell phone. I watched him. This was the first domino. This was the fallout. The core destruction was complete. Now I could simply observe the shockwave. He was pacing. A tight, frantic circle. Like a cornered animal. His face was blotchy and red. He was trying to salvage something. Trying to activate his own network. Not realizing that I had just used a network that trumped his. He was still operating under the fatal miscalculation that he had any power left. He thought his protege, the man he had tried to install in my place, was his ally. He was a fool. I could almost hear the voicemail he was leaving. His voice a frantic whisper. He was saying they blindsided him. It was David. He came out of nowhere. It was a setup. He was telling his friend that their plan was still in motion, that they needed to move on it now. He was telling him to call him as soon as he got this, that they had to strike back. I dwelled on the contrast. The sheer, beautiful irony of it. 15 minutes ago, Marcus was the predator. The VP on the top floor, sitting in judgment of my future. I was the mid-level prey. Now, I was the one sitting comfortably on the top floor, in the quiet conference room, being personally apologized to by the chief strategy officer. And he was the one down in the lobby. A public spectacle. Being escorted out like a common criminal. He still thought he had a plan. He was a creature of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He could not process a reality where he had been so thoroughly and completely outmaneuvered. He believed he was a wolf, but he was just a rabid dog, and he had just been put down. He just did not know it yet. He finished his call, shoving his phone back into his pocket. He saw Frank, the guard, watching him and yelled something, gesturing wildly. Frank did not flinch. Frank just pointed toward the glass revolving doors. Marcus's shoulders slumped. The fight was gone. He was, finally, defeated. He turned and walked toward the exit. No longer a VP. No longer a threat. He was just gone, David said quietly, his voice pulling me from my observation. That he would not be back. I told him I knew. The first domino had fallen. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the second one, his protégé, was about to topple right into my hands. I was back at my desk. It was 2 hours after the execution. David had finished his apology, and I had returned to my floor. The atmosphere was different. People who used to slide past my cubicle without a glance were now making wide, respectful arcs around my space. The two executives, Richard and Anne, had apparently spread the story of the execution in conference room B with the speed of frightened birds. The entire floor knew. My computer chimed. A new email. I already knew what this was. This was the second domino. The email was from a Greg Sanders. I knew the name. He was Marcus's protégé, the man Marcus had been trying to shoehorn into my job. He was the recipient of that frantic, desperate voicemail from the lobby. I smiled. A small, internal acknowledgement. I pictured Greg sitting at his desk at his old company, a social parasite, a remora fish that had attached itself to a shark, only to watch that shark be publicly butchered. Greg, at this very moment, would have two pieces of information. First, he would have Marcus's panicked, unhinged voicemail, which I had correctly predicted. The ravings of a madman. Second, he would have just received the all-staff, company-wide email from HR, which David had assured me was being drafted. It would be cold, corporate, and final. It would announce the immediate departure of Marcus Cole. Greg, being an opportunist, would be analyzing his situation. He would weigh the two messages. On one side, affrantique, unemployed man babbling about a conspiracy. On the other, a formal email from a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He would realize that Marcus was not just fired, he was radioactive. He would realize that any plan he had with Marcus was now not just dead. It was a career-ending liability. Greg, I knew, was not stupid. He was just a coward, loyal only to power. And the power had just shifted, dramatically. Associating with Marcus now meant career suicide. So, he did the only thing a creature like him could do. Et pivoted. He betrayed his old master to cozy up to the new, perceived power. I opened his email. The subject line was simple. Just the word, congratulations. I dwelled on that one word. The audacity. The beautiful, predictable, spineless treachery. The email went on to say that he had heard through the grapevine about the events of this morning. He wanted to extend his congratulations on my well-deserved validation. He also wanted to state for the record that he was entirely unaware of Marcus's unprofessional actions or his intentions. He claimed he was deeply troubled by his management style from afar. He said Marcus had mentioned several projects he was working on, and that he had some information regarding his other vendors that I and Mr. Stone might find useful in the transition. He ended by asking me to let him know if he could be of any assistance. It was perfect. I had deleted Marcus's voicemail. I was certain of it. He was now actively feeding me the rope to hang his former boss. He was a social parasite, and he had just attached himself to me. He thought he was being clever, saving himself. He had no idea he was just another domino, falling exactly as the laws of physics, my laws, demanded. He was offering information. I knew what that meant. Marcus, in his arrogance, had not just been trying to fire me to hire a friend. He had been trying to fire me to remove the one manager who actually read the budgets. Greg was not just the replacement. He was the reason. I tapped my fingers on my desk. I would let him wait for 1 hour. Let him sweat. Let him wonder if his betrayal had been fast enough. Then, I would reply. I would tell him thank you, and that I was always interested in information that was useful to the company. I would tell him to please send it over. I would accept his offer. I would take every piece of data he gave me. The second domino had not just fallen. It had picked itself up and walked directly into my hand. I sent the reply to Greg. I told him thank you, and that I was always interested in information useful to the company, and to please send it over. I hit send, my expression unchanged. The second domino had been secured. I turned my attention back to my own work, or at least, I pretended to. The real work was happening all around me. This was the third domino. The social fallout. The news of Marcus's 30-second execution in Conference Room B had spread through the executive wing like a chemical fire. The source, of course, was Richard and Anne. The two silent witnesses. The two executives who had sat there, ready to watch me be carved up, saying nothing. They had done nothing. And in a corporation, doing nothing is an action. It is an endorsement of the aggressor. They had backed the wrong horse. And now, they were terrified. I dwelled on their psychology. They were not evil, like Marcus. They were worse. They were hollow. They were driven by a simple, primal fear of landing on the wrong side of power. For the last 3 months, Marcus was the new, loud, aggressive power. They had aligned with him. Now, in a single, 30-second stroke, David had revealed Marcus as a fraud and me as the one with the true, unspoken alliance. Their miscalculation was one of cowardice. They had assumed my silence in that meeting was weakness. They had no idea it was the calm before the strike. Now, they were scrambling to fix their mistake. They were desperate to prove their loyalty to David, and by extension, to me. I heard footsteps approaching my desk. Soft, hesitant footsteps. I did not look up. I continued to type. A voice asked for Alara. I stopped typing and looked up. My face, a perfect mask of neutral professionalism. It was Richard. He was a tall man, but he seemed to be trying to make himself smaller. His shoulders hunched. He was holding a styrofoam cup of coffee like a shield. I just said his name. Richard. My voice was flat. Not warm. Not cold. Just a fact. He said hi, forcing a smile that was painful to look at. He told me that was just a terrible business this morning. Really terrible. He said he just wanted to say he was so sorry I had to go through that. I just stared. I did not say thank you. I did not say it's fine. I let him twist in the wind. He swallowed, the smile faltering. He stammered that he just wanted to say he never trusted Marcus. Not from day one. He claimed he told Anne that there was something off about that guy. That he was all flash. No substance. My mind flashed back. A perfect, clear memory. Then, it was just last week. A divisional meeting. I had presented a data model. Richard had immediately spoken after me, rephrasing my conclusion and presenting it as his own idea, looking directly at Marcus for approval. He was a sycophant, a remora. Now, here he was, this same man, this hollow creature, telling me he had never trusted the man whose approval he had been so desperate for just days ago. He was a liar. I said, I know. Just those 2 words. They were an accusation, not an agreement. Richard's face flushed. He had no idea how to interpret that. He had expected me to be grateful, to welcome him to my side. I was offering him nothing. He said right, nodding too quickly. He babbled that he was just glad that it was all sorted. That I had always done great work. That he had always said that. He backed away, telling me to let him know if I needed. Well, anything. Anything at all. He practically fled. I watched him scurry back to his office. I then glanced across the floor. I saw Anne, the other silent witness. She was in her glass-walled office, pretending to be on a call. She was watching me. Our eyes met. She, too, was terrified. She did not have the courage to approach my desk. Instead, she just looked at me, and then she smiled. A wide, bright, fake smile. A moment later, a new message popped up on my company chat. It was from Anne. It was a single emoji. A thumbs up. It was pathetic. It was the social hierarchy of the entire floor. A structure built on fear, realigning itself in real time. They were isolating Marcus's memory, cutting him out, pretending he never mattered. They were not doing it to support me. They were doing it to save themselves. I did not reply to her message. I just watched it. A yellow cartoon hand, hanging in the digital air. I dwelled on this new reality. Yesterday, I was the irrelevant manager in the cheap seats. Today, I was the one they feared. And fear, I thought, was a much more reliable foundation for respect than anything else. The third domino had fallen. The rest of the day was quiet. The fear on the floor was a palpable, heavy blanket. People spoke in hushed tones. They were no longer afraid of Marcus. They were afraid of the silence, the sudden, violent vacuum his departure had created. They were afraid of David. And by extension, they were afraid of me. My computer chimed again. It was 4 p.m. This was not an email from a terrified executive or a spineless traitor. This was an automated, system-wide notification. The subject line was about account deactivation and a legal hold. This was the 4th domino. This was the system engaging. I dwelled on this. David's execution of Marcus in Conference Room B was not just personal theater. It was a corporate necessity. David, and by extension the CEO who had approved Marcus's hire, now had a serious liability on their hands. They had fired a vice president. Marcus, a man defined by his narcissistic rage, would not go quietly. He would sue. He would claim wrongful termination, defamation, anything. David and the company had to find a for-cause reason for the termination. They had to prove that Marcus was not just a bad fit, but that he had actively harmed the company. His attack on me was the catalyst, but it was not the legal justification. They needed more. And so, the system that Marcus had so arrogantly tried to weaponize against me, the system of performance reviews, HR write-ups, and corporate policy was now turning its full, impersonal, and infinitely more powerful gaze upon him. The notification was clinical. It stated that all accounts, expense reports, and active vendor contracts previously managed by Marcus Cole were now under a mandatory legal hold and administrative review. His corporate purchasing card was frozen. His email account was locked and archived. It was a digital execution, a follow-up to the physical one. I analyzed this with a cold sense of satisfaction. Marcus had been too arrogant, too sloppy. He was blinded by his new title. He believed his position as a vice president made him untouchable. He believed no one would ever dare to audit his expenses or question his vendor choices. He thought he was a king. He failed to understand that in a corporation, everyone is just an employee. And no one is more dangerous than the legal department when it is trying to protect the company from a lawsuit. My phone rang. This time, it was the internal line. The caller ID showed it was HR legal compliance. I answered with my name. A woman's voice. Sarah, the head of HR. A woman I respected. She was not a coward like Richard or Anne. She was a professional. She said, "Hi, Elara," and apologized for what I was put through this morning. She said David had fully briefed her. She was conducting a formal review of Marcus's tenure, and she needed to schedule a time to get my formal statement. Her tone was not accusatory. She was not investigating me. She was asking for my help. She was asking for the ammunition she needed to finalize his termination for cause. This was the part I had been waiting for. This was the part where the system, now aligned with me, would do the heavy lifting. I told her, of course, my voice calm and steady. I told her I had several files regarding the projects he had adjusted that she might find illuminating. I also had the original data models he claimed were unacceptable. I told her I could be available first thing in the morning. She replied that would be excellent, and thanked me. She said they were thorough. I knew what thorough meant. It meant they were not just looking at the file he used to attack me. They were looking at everything. Every lunch receipt. Every hotel bill. Every contract he had tried to rush through. And I knew, from Greg's email, exactly where they needed to look. The investigation, which had started as a response to his attack on me, was now digging deep into his finances. He had tried to swat a fly, and in doing so, had accidentally triggered a forensic audit of his entire fraudulent life. I hung up the phone. I looked at the automated legal hold email. The fourth domino had not just fallen, it had landed on a pressure plate, and I could hear the heavy, grinding sound of the real machinery of destruction beginning to move. I walked into Sarah's office the next morning. I was not nervous. This was not an interrogation. This was a collaboration. I was holding my laptop in a small, organized binder. She thanked me for coming in so quickly, and said the legal team was eager to finalize this. I told her I understood. I sat down and opened the binder. I explained that, as I had mentioned, I had the original data models for the projects Marcus cited in his review. And here were the email chains, where he specifically directed my team to implement the changes he later claimed were failures. Sarah's eyes scanned the first page, her expression hardening. She said, "This is..." I finished her sentence. Thorough. I explained that he was creating a paper trail to blame me for his own directives. But he was sloppy. He left the originals. She nodded, taking the binder. She said this was exactly what they needed on the performance side. It proved his review was fabricated. It protected me. Good, I said. I did not smile. I then paused, as if a new thought had just occurred to me. I told her that, actually, there was one other thing. It might be nothing, but in the spirit of transparency, I had received an email yesterday from the man Marcus was trying to hire. Sarah's head snapped up. She asked if it was Greg Sanders. I confirmed it was. I opened my laptop and turned it to face her, showing the email I had received from Greg. The one where he offered information. I told her he had sent me this, and pointed to the attachment Greg had forwarded. I explained it appeared to be a draft proposal for a new vendor contract, a consulting group I had never heard of. I said Greg seemed to think it was irregular. Sarah leaned in, her eyes narrowing. She read the email, then opened the attachment. It was a proposal for a $2 million consulting contract, set to begin the next quarter. The vendor was a new LLC, Sanders Strategic Solutions. Sarah said the name Sanders, her voice trailing off as the connection clicked in her head. I repeated, with a perfect mask of helpfulness, that, as I had said, it might be nothing, but it seemed irregular. That was a very large, no-bid contract. And as the manager of that division, I would have been the one responsible for reviewing and approving that budget item. Funny. I had never seen it. Sarah was no longer looking at me. She was staring at the screen, her face pale. She finally understood. I could see the final, terrible piece of the puzzle locking into place in her mind. I dwelled on this moment. This was the real reason. This was the fifth domino. Marcus's attack on me was not just about ego. It was not just about installing a friend. It was a cover-up for a multi-million-dollar fraud. His fatal miscalculation was, once again, his arrogance. He was blinded. He assumed I was just a spreadsheet manager. He failed to realize I was the only manager in that division, with the systemic knowledge and the spine to scrutinize a $2 million line item. He had to get rid of me. He could not risk me seeing that contract. His clumsy, fabricated performance review was his attempt to remove the one firewall me that stood between him and his theft. He had tried to fire me for poor metrics. He was, in fact, trying to fire me to prevent me from discovering his felony. Sarah's voice was tight. She told me she needed a copy of this. Immediately. Of course, I said. I forwarded the entire chain. 2 days later, David called me. His voice was grim, but satisfied. He told me it was done. The investigation was over. The LLC was a shell company, registered to Greg Sanders. The proposal was a complete fabrication, an attempt to defraud the company of $2 million. Marcus signed off on the initial wire transfer setup himself. I said, I see. David continued. He said his termination was for cause. It was ironclad. It voided his entire severance package. His stock options were gone. The board was currently discussing whether to press criminal charges. I was silent. I thought about the man who had tried to destroy my livelihood, my reputation, all to steal $2 million. I thought about the irony. His disparity. Arrogant attempt to get me the $150,000 manager fired had just cost him his own $20 million golden parachute. It was, I thought, a terrible return on investment. The fraud investigation was over. Marcus was gone. His name was already a whisper in the hallways, a ghost of a bad decision. The company, and David, had their for-cause termination. The threat of a lawsuit from Marcus had evaporated, replaced by the company's quiet discussion of whether or not to pursue criminal charges against him for the attempted $2 million fraud. My phone rang. The internal line. It was David's personal extension. He asked if I could come up to his office. I told him I was on my way. I walked to the executive elevator. I rode it up to the 48th floor. The floor that was all quiet carpets and expensive, original art. His assistant nodded to me as I approached, not even asking my name. She told me he was waiting for me. I walked into his office. It was large. A corner unit with glass walls that overlooked the entire city. It was the office of a man who had truly made it. A man who had survived. David was not sitting behind his massive desk. He was standing by the window, looking down at the city below. He gestured for me to join him. I stood beside him. We both looked down at the tiny, frantic cars moving along the streets. He told me it was done. That he was gone. His severance was voided. His stock options were clawed back. He was finished. I said nothing. I just watched the city. David turned his head to look at me. His expression was not one of gratitude. It was one of acknowledgement. It was the look of an equal. He said that this was the second time I had saved this company from a multi-million-dollar disaster. And just like that, the now faded, and I was in the then. Then. It was 5 years ago. I was not Alara, the respected manager. I was just Alara, a junior financial analyst. So far down the org chart, I did not even have a cubicle wall. Just a desk and a bullpen. I was working late. 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. Auditing a series of quarterly reports. And I found it. It was not a typo. It was a systemic, structural accounting error. A $30 million liability that had been miscategorized, effectively hidden from the SEC and the shareholders. It was a disaster. It was the kind of mistake that did not just get people fired, it got them indicted. I spent the next 48 hours, fueled by nothing but coffee and a cold, rising sense of clarity, tracing the origin of the error. It was not malice. It was arrogance. It was a new, ambitious vice president who had moved too fast, signed off on a merger integration without reading the fine print, and then buried the mistake in a cascade of sloppy journal entries. That new, ambitious vice president was David. He was just like Marcus. Loud, arrogant, certain of his own genius. He had just made one fatal mistake. I had a choice. I could report it. I could go to the CEO, to the board. I would have been a hero for a week, and David would have been destroyed. His career over. But I was playing a longer game. I dwelled on this. I recognized his ambition. I knew he was smart, just arrogant. And I knew that an ambitious man who is publicly destroyed is an enemy. But an ambitious man who is privately saved, that man is an asset. A power debt. I did not just find the problem. I fixed it. I spent another full day building the solution. A complex, but légal, reallocation of the liability. A way to unwind the error over 3 quarters that would satisfy the auditors without triggering a catastrophic restatement of our earnings. I did not email him. I walked up to the 48th floor. A junior analyst with no appointment. I walked past his assistant and stood in his doorway. He looked up, annoyed, and asked what I wanted. I placed a single, 5-page binder on his desk. I told him that this was the $30 million error from the Apex merger. And this was the solution. I told him it was already implemented on the test server. All he had to do was approve the patch. I watched his face. I watched the blood drain from it. I watched him read the first page. He was not like Marcus. He was smart enough to understand, instantly, what he was looking at. He understood, instantly, that his entire career was in the hands of the junior analyst standing in front of him. He understood that I had not just found his crime, I had hidden it. He looked up at me, his face pale. He was speechless. I told him it was handled. And I turned. And I walked out. I never mentioned it again. Now, I was back in his office, 5 years later, standing by the window. We were both silent. The power debt was a tangible thing in the room, a massive, unspoken weight. He knew he owed me his career. He knew that when I texted him, asking for his help. Now, it was not a request. It was the bill coming due. I dwelled on my preparation. My plan was not just a text message. It was 5 years of patience. It was the systemic knowledge of accounting and the psychological knowledge of ambition. Marcus's final miscalculation was that he saw me as an irrelevant, mid-level manager. He was blinded. He never, ever considered that I might be the one person in the entire company who held the leash on his own boss. I finally said, my voice quiet, that he was sloppy. Yes, David said. He was. He forgot that the real power in this building is not the person with the loudest voice. It's the person who knows where the bodies are buried. Or, In your case, the person who buried them. David and I finished our conversation. The power debt remained unspoken, but reaffirmed. I walked back to my desk, my purpose clear. The main threat was gone. The tremors, however, were still echoing through the system. A week passed. The office returned to a new kind of normal. The fear that had defined the hours after Marcus's firing had settled into a quiet, profound respect. Richard and Anne were now almost comically deferential. Greg Sanders, the traitor, had sent me all the information he had, and I had dutifully forwarded it to Sarah in HR, solidifying my position as a team player, a protector of the company. This was the seventh domino. The final, reputational collapse. I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was different this time. Not professional. Not stressed. It was conspiratorial. Friendly. She asked if I had a minute for a chat that was not about work. This was new. I told her, of course, and asked what was on her mind. She said she thought I should know. As the interested party in this whole affair. They had received a reference check request for Marcus Cole this morning. My face remained neutral. I did not smile. I just said one word, asking her to go on. Yes, Sarah continued, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. From a small, third-rate logistics firm out in the suburbs. They were considering him for a junior director role. A job, I might add, that pays about 40% of what he was making here. A job he would have spit on 6 months ago. I dwelled on this. The man who had worn his new VP title like a crown, the man who had tried to destroy me for his own ego and greed, was now scrambling for a junior position at a no-name company. I asked, my voice calm, what our official response was. Sarah said their official response was the truth. That Marcus Cole was terminated for cause on this date, related to gross misconduct and attempted fraud. She said they were legally obligated to say it, and she had to admit, she enjoyed the obligation. I pictured the scene. I pictured the HR manager at that small firm, listening to that sentence. The word fraud is not a suggestion. It is a death sentence in the corporate world. The executive world, especially, is small. David and Sarah had made sure that the real story, not Marcus's, I was blindsided narrative, was the one that stuck. Sarah continued, saying he had failed the background check. Obviously, the recruiter at that firm had called her back, personally, and told her, may God, he had almost hired him. She told me Marcus was done. He was not just fired. He was blacklisted. He would not work in this industry again. He might not even work in this city again. I told her thank you for letting me know. She said she just thought I should know. That the books were closed on this one. We hung up. I sat back in my chair. I looked at the spreadsheets on my screen. The very things Marcus had told me to stick to. He had tried to take my livelihood, to reduce me to nothing. And in doing so, he had become nothing himself. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only a cold, quiet sense of order. The books were closed. The debt was paid. I thought of him, sitting in his expensive, mortgaged house, with no job, no severance, and a name that was now synonymous with fraud. I felt nothing at all. He deserved this. He had earned it. It has been a month. The name Marcus Cole was now ancient history, a corporate cautionary tale whispered by new hires. His blacklisting was total. His reputational, financial, and career destruction was absolute. But his departure had left a vacuum. The vice president of operations. The division had been in limbo, run efficiently by me, but without the formal title. I had been quietly doing the job for 4 weeks, cleaning up the mess he had left, streamlining the budgets he had tried to inflate, and managing the team he had tried to terrorize. The final domino was about to fall. My internal line rang. It was David's extension. His voice was brief. Not a request, but a summons. He told me the CEO wanted to see us. His office. 10 minutes. He hung up. I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I felt nothing. Just the quiet click of the last piece of a complex machine locking into place. This was not an interview. This was a coronation. The power debt from 5 years ago was not just about saving me from an attack. It was about securing my future. David, whose career I had saved, was the CEO's most trusted advisor. His recommendation was law. I rode the elevator to the 50th floor. The CEO's office. I had only been in here once before. David was already there. Standing next to the CEO, a man named Harrison. Harrison was old, from an established family, and saw the company as his dynasty. He did not care for loud, flashy new hires like Marcus. He cared for stability. He cared for what David told him. Harrison said, his voice a dry rustle, that David had told him I had been the one holding operations together since the incident. I confirmed that I had. My voice was calm. David spoke. He said I had been the highest performing manager in that division for 3 years. He said I was also the one who identified the fraudulent vendor contract. And, as Harrison might recall, I was the analyst who saved the Apex merger from a $30 million restatement 5 years ago. Harrison's eyes settled on me, truly seeing me for the first time. The irrelevant analyst. The mid-level manager. I dwelled on this. The irony. My entire preparation was now being laid bare. Not as a weapon, but as a resume. David was not just paying his debt to me. He was presenting me to the king as the only logical solution. Harrison told me the job was mine, if I wanted it. Vice President of Operations. I looked at him. I did not smile. I did not gasp, or say thank you. I did not show weakness. I showed readiness. I let a calculated, silent beat pass. I told him yes. I accepted. I asked when I should start. David smiled. A small, knowing expression. Harrison nodded. He said I already had. My new salary and options package would be on my desk within the hour. The next day, I was moving my things. I was not moving them into a bigger cubicle. I was moving them into the corner office. The one with the glass walls, the private conference table, and the view of the entire city. Marcus's old office. It had been scrubbed. Of course. Emptied of his arrogant, flashy awards and his stupid, oversized desk toys. But it was the same room, the same air. I stood in the center of the vast space. I dwelled on the finality of this. This was the room where he had sat, drunk on his own minor power, and plotted my destruction. Down the hall was Conference Room B, the place he had chosen for my public execution. And now, this was my office. I walked to the desk, my desk, and sat in the large leather chair. My chair. I thought about his fatal miscalculation. His final, stupid, arrogant mistake. He had called me irrelevant. He had told me to stick to spreadsheets. He had tried to fire me, a mid-level manager, to hide a $2 million crime. He had failed to realize that those spreadsheets were my kingdom. He had failed to realize that I was the one who held the $30 million power debt over his own boss. He thought my opinion did not matter. Now, my opinion was the only one that mattered in this entire division. I had won. I had won financially. The salary package was obscene. I had won reputationally. I was now the vice president. And I had won psychologically. I looked at the phone on my new desk. The direct line to David. The direct line to the CEO. I had the power now. The real power. Not the loud, narcissistic, fragile power that Marcus had wielded like a club. I had the quiet, patient, prepared, kind, the kind that lasts.